This is Roberta Foster, and welcome to today's edition of the Author's Corner, brought to you by KNEO 91.7 FM, The Word. And today I welcome Dave Rahn to Author's Corner, who, along with Ebony Davis, has co-written the book Grit and Joy, Help for Bewildered Families of Teens, which is published by D6 Family Ministry. And Dave will tell you all about how to find the book at the end of the program. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about both authors. Ebony, who's not with us today, but she has been a youth pastor near Washington, D.C. for more than 20 years. She's written widely, contributing to books and authoring articles related to youth ministry. She's been married for 28 years and has 2 young adult children. And Dave, who is with us today, has spent 30 years as a professor at Huntington University. He's published more than 100 articles and numerous books and loves integrating social research with practical theology. And he and his wife have been married for 50 years. Thank you, Dave, so much for being with us here today on Author's Corner.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Roberta. Thank you.
Well, with all those articles written, you've obviously done a tremendous amount of research. What compelled you to write this book about how to help bewildered families of teens?
That's a great question. I think I have a theory about all that writing that I've done in the past. It's sort of like you kind of keep building on it, right? And hopefully your latest thing that you've written is the wisest of all, I hope. And that's where we're at with this Grit and Joy. I was privileged. I was working with Youth for Christ USA in the last part of my tenure. I actually finished 41 years with them and finished as a senior VP of leadership development and ministry. And I was invited to a room that I'd never been to before by the Yale Center for Faith and Culture. And they had this massive grant from the John Templeton Foundation to try to study joy everywhere. And the room I was invited in was the one that was saying, let's look at joy for adolescents. And so when I walked in, I recognized 3 or 4 colleagues that I'd bumped into over the years, scholars from different schools, but a lot of them I didn't know. And I kind of wisecracked right from the start. Am I the token evangelical in this room? And they came right back at me. The director said, you're the token parachurch guy, which meant that I was thrilled because it meant that my Youth for Christ role, where our mission is working with non-church kids, trying to help them understand how to have a relationship with Christ and grow in Christ. I mean, that got me in the room, and that was fascinating. So for 4 years, I was a senior member of that kind of group that was studying joy for adolescents. And one of the things that happened along the way is they asked us senior researchers to find a junior researcher, and Ebony had been a former student of mine, master's student, and we'd worked together on projects before and research and writing. And I just knew that she was trustworthy, and I invited her to join me. And before long, it turned out that what we were doing in research turned into a lot more of a personal journey, because we looked at each other and go, some of the stuff we're learning, we're not practicing. And so we decided that we wanted to sort of smash together some research that we were doing and that we investigated with our own personal journey. And I think that's what the book was all about. The book ended up being the way that we could make sense of all of this together.
Well, a lot of people like stories and personal testimonies, and so that's a good way to get your point across. In your research, are you finding that youth are having a problem with living with joy or finding what joyful life is supposed to be?
Yeah, and more than that, Roberta, I think we all might stare at the scripture that says things like rejoice always, and kind of wonder, okay, if I were to test that against, like I had a blood pressure cuff on me, some sort of joy pressure cuff on my arm all day. How would that rate? How would I do? And I actually think that one of the things we looked at was realize this notion of resilient joy is quite elusive, but when somebody can figure out how that works, it's also a real game changer for all of life. And the data is trending terribly for young people, especially. But we just think, in fact, we call them the canaries in the coal mine. That they're the ones who are indicating that life as we know it isn't working well, and that's unfortunately even true among those who are religiously inclined, which says something's amiss in the way that we who love our kids, whether it's a youth pastor or parents, that maybe we're not doing something right so that we can help the kids experience joy, maybe because we don't know how to experience joy like that.
One of the things you bring up is, of course, the whole social media thing and the fact that youth spend so much time engrossed in watching various things. And I think you mentioned that YouTube is like the number one thing today, which that kind of surprised me because you can find so much good stuff on YouTube, but apparently they're not finding the good stuff. But anyway, they're still in front of a screen, looking for something of pleasure in front of a screen rather than real life.
And there are a lot of other researchers, not necessarily Christian researchers, but a lot of people are really pressing those points, and different actually state legislatures and lawmakers are reconsidering screen time in the classroom because there's just so much about this. In fact, John Haidt's book, Haidt, called The Anxious Generation, really documents this in a fascinating way, and I think it's gotten a lot of traction around the world. We cite that book, but it was, we also were paying attention to the kids that we know the best and care about the best. Ebony had two adolescents that she was raising in her home, and trying to test things at the dinner table, and they just wow, this is not working. This notion of all the time access being turned and being tethered to this connectivity world, instead of it being a good thing, it was not a good thing. And we're trying to make sense of why. And I think it crystallizes around the notion of what we give ourselves our attention to, and that takes us right back to the words that Jesus had for us about what it means to follow Him.
So you said she was trying a couple things around the table that wasn't working. What was she trying?
Yeah, well, she would just ask the questions and try to get them to engage on just normal, how was your day kind of questions. But she's creative. She asked them very useful questions and insightful questions, and just noticed that it wasn't easy for them to sort of unplug from the nervousness of not looking at their phone and being attached to their phone and knowing what their friends are doing online and all that kind of stuff, and just being fully present at the table. And I think there's an awful lot of parents and youth pastors who understand that, and understand that if you can get eye contact when you're talking to a young person these days, it's rare territory.
Wow. Well, I've never raised children and don't work in youth ministry, so those kind of statements are a little surprising to me, but I imagine there's a lot of parents that, or a lot of listeners that's ringing home with. So, in your book, you offer some guidelines to help parents to figure out how to work with teens, and so what are a couple of the things that you try to stress in your book?
Yeah, thank you. We end the book. There's 4 different chapters that talk about 4 different we'd call habits to practice, and that's based on some of what we understand to be, brain science ways of sort of really embedding lifestyle changes in our way of being. But I think before I get to those kind of practical tips, here's what I fear. This is old guy Dave, who's been around youth ministry for 50 years now, and I fear what's happened in ministry circles way too much is that we've gotten so enamored with practical tips and how-tos that we don't know why we're doing those at the deeper level, and therefore we just imagine we can practice these mechanical behaviors that change us. And the deep change, the one that results in resilient joy, is not just simply behavioral. It's identity level stuff. It takes us into a much deeper journey of sort of figuring out how is it that you and I engage the presence of Jesus, who we know is alive and promises to be with us always. And that really was, I mean, the notion of grit also comes from the social science world. Angela Duckworth at the University of Pennsylvania published a book on research on grit. And when we studied that, we realized, well, wait a minute, this idea that she's got of grit, it makes so much sense, and it actually looks a lot like what Jesus seemed to mean by faith. That there's a biblical single focus about what it is that you give your attention to, and then you go all out with all of your life sort of being ordered around that focus. And Ebony and I asked ourselves, well, I wonder what the original disciples, the followers of Jesus, the ones that he built the church on, we wondered what was the grit? I mean, they were different people. They had lots of different backgrounds, but maybe Jesus was steering them into this single same focus and this grit. And we concluded the one thing that they seemed to be good at after 3 years of being with him, and then the Holy Spirit descending on them at Pentecost and then carrying forward. It seemed like they were good about one simple thing. That was noticing the presence of Jesus and being near him in almost everything. And now we step back and we go, well, do young people get trained that way? Actually, we didn't feel like anybody gets trained that way very well. And that's where we took it. We go, well, the training's possible. We've seen it in history. There are wonderful examples. Even somebody like I think we write about Brother Lawrence in his book Practicing the Presence of God. He was a humble dishwasher, and he just decided he's going to try to figure out how to do dishes all the time with Jesus, you know. And then we cite a lot of people that we bump into, some of the people that we interview and we talk to, who oftentimes overcome a lot of adversity in order to do this and to experience the presence of Jesus. And we go, well, that's something. I've got a book on my shelf by a Sri Lankan national minister for years named Ajith Fernando, and the book title just captivates me. It's called The Call to Joy and Pain. And I think he's right. He's right on. And when Jesus says, follow him by taking up your cross daily, it is purposeful, but it also embraces the necessity sometimes of suffering. And they'll go, okay, well, if I'm suffering, am I going to have joy? Well, according to James, we can.
Yes.
Yeah, consider it all joy, my friends. We talked about 4 habits, Roberta, because habits seem to make sense. And what we know about gritty people is they persevere and they innovate. That is, they do things. It's sort of like, I'm a Cubs fan. There was a I mean, it's been long suffering for most of my life to be a Cubs fan. I was a Cubs. But I remember a T-shirt one year, way before, probably 30, 40 years ago, that the Cubs put out, and the T-shirt said, whatever it takes. and that's kind of how the gritty people are.
Exactly.
They go, whatever it takes. And so we start to make adjustments, and you pay attention, and you go, well, I mean, for example, I want to know the voice of the Lord better than I seem to. I want to be able to recognize his voice. If I ask myself an honest question, I go, when do I hear his voice most clearly? Well, that's easily answered. It is early morning, cup of coffee, looking out my window, the Bible open. That is easy. But the truth is, as a youth minister, I need to hear his voice when there's 100 middle school kids running around me, just clamoring and crying and yelling and screaming. And I'm going, I need all of that. And so how can I sort of improve on my ability to pick out Jesus' voice among the clamor of the crowd.
Well, Dave, I'm going to break in here for just a minute because our time for our first interview is up. But to the listening audience, Dave has agreed to come back again and complete our interview. But before I let you go for this time, Dave, why don't you let our listeners know how they can find out more about Grit and Joy, Help for Bewildered Families of Teens, that you wrote with Ebony Davis.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, our publisher is named D6 Family Ministry, and it's easy to find on the web. If you can go directly there if you want and poke around at some of their other great labels. But also it's on Amazon. Just put in Grit and Joy. If you need to spell my name, R-A-H-N, that'll help you get there real quick.
Okay, so one more time, the book today is Grit and Joy, Help for Bewildered Families of Teens, written by Dave Rahn, R-A-H-N, and Ebony Davis. And we do thank D6 Family Ministry for giving us a copy of the book to talk about. And as I mentioned, be sure to join me again next week at this time for a continuation of this interview. And Dave, thank you so much for being with us.
You bet. Thank you.
And to our listening audience, thank you for tuning in. This is Roberta Foster on the Author's Corner. Join me again next time.
The world is in chaos, and you're here for a purpose. What does the Bible have to say about it all? I'm Mark Taylor, host of Crosspoint podcast and radio show, and I'd like to invite you to join me each week as I navigate the complexities of faith, culture, and personal growth. Each week, I interview a different guest who is making an impact on the culture for God's kingdom. Whether you're seeking spiritual guidance, true information, or a fresh perspective, this podcast equips you to discern truth in today's chaotic world. When Christianity intersects with everyday life, that's where you'll find Crosspoint, sometimes discussing the issues that some churches don't want to talk about. Look up Crosspoint with Mark Taylor wherever you get your podcast, produced by KNEO Radio and the Sky High Podcast Network.